Did you know that Jackson is considered the second poorest city in America, with a poverty rate of 25.9% and a median household income of only a little more than $42,000? For comparison, the national poverty rate is 12.4%, meaning that Jackson's is 13.5% higher, and the national median household income is over $32,000 higher than Jackson's at $74,580. While present-day Jackson is clearly struggling, it's actually had a long and troubled history. For instance, Jackson has struggled from everything to the city being completely burned down during the Civil War in 1863 to a more recent water crisis that left 180,000 residents plus hospitals and schools without access to safe drinking water. Clearly, Jackson is in trouble. But what's behind all of this? Well, today on Across the Globe, we're going to be looking at how Jackson, Mississippi got ruined. Jackson's history. In order to understand what has happened to Jackson today, let's take a brief look at the city's history. Jackson has had a complex history from its founding in 1821 to its current status as the state's capital and the largest city in all of Mississippi. The city was originally named after Andrew Jackson, the seventh President of the United States, and its early years saw rapid development and growth, largely due to its strategic location along important trade routes. This location enabled Jackson's early economic growth, mostly centered around trade and the movement of goods. The city's economy in the early and mid-1800s was further bolstered by its role as a hub for cotton trade, a hugely important industry in the South at the time. However, the Civil War brought significant turmoil to Jackson. In 1863, Union forces captured and then burned much of the city, which was a move designed to disrupt the Confederate war effort. This left Jackson in ruins and marked a significant turning point in its history, as it significantly impacted the city's infrastructure and economy. Following the Civil War, Jackson faced the huge task of needing to rebuild. During this time, the city and state struggled with economic, social, and political challenges which, as we'll soon see, have continued to impact the city over the years. Despite these challenges, Jackson was able to rebound, at least temporarily. Throughout the 20th century, Jackson experienced significant population growth, becoming the most populated city in Mississippi by the 1920s. However, Jackson faced significant challenges in the second half of the 20th century and continuing in the 21st century, challenges which have led to its troubled state today. Challenge number 1. Systemic racism. Jackson's troubled history with racism is unfortunately at the center of many of the city's current-day problems. Today, the city of Jackson is 82.2% black and only 15.1% white. However, the city wasn't always this way, and the events that led to its current racial makeup explain many of the issues it faces. To understand this better, let's go back in history to the 1970s. Beginning around then, a phenomenon known as white flight started, which refers to white people moving out of urban centers into suburban areas. As a result, middle-class white people began taking their tax dollars out of the city and into these suburban areas, leading to a drain of the city's tax base and exacerbating racial and social issues. The reasoning behind Jackson's white flight is pretty shocking. White families began moving out of the city when the city's schools were forced by federal courts to finally desegregate, even though this was a full 16 years after the Brown v. Board of Education Supreme Court case ruled that public school segregation was unconstitutional. Upset with the desegregation and not wanting their children to be in classes with black students, white families began moving their children out of the Jackson school districts and into the suburbs. Since that time, Jackson has seen a decrease in its population of about 40,000 residents, which is a pretty significant amount considering that its population peaked in 1980 at about 200,000 people. Specifically, between 1980 and 1990, the white population of Jackson dropped from 52% to 43%. Today, as I mentioned, only about 15% of the population is white, with the remaining 82% black. As a result of this systemic racism and early white flight, The Washington Post reported that due to a decline in its tax base during the 70s, the city's infrastructure soon started to fall apart as it lacked money for essential repairs and upkeep. Challenge number 2. Water crisis. Another key factor that has led to Jackson's struggles as a city is its seemingly never-ending water crisis, brought about by the city's failing infrastructure and inability to provide safe drinking water to many of its residents. As you can imagine, lacking access to clean and safe drinking water can have a significant impact on residents' well-being and cause those who can afford to leave the city to do so. While there have been issues with the city's water supply over the years, Jackson's water crisis reached a critical point when the city's main water treatment plant failed in 2022, leaving approximately 180,000 residents without reliable access to clean drinking water due to years of infrastructure neglect. The effects of this were significant and felt not only on an individual level but also by the city's hospitals, schools, and fire stations. The National Guard was brought in to help out individuals and hand out bottled water. But this response ended up being completely insufficient, with residents waiting in line for over 2 hours just to receive a single case of bottled water. To make matters worse, the National Guard ultimately ended up running out of water, forcing many people to rely on unsafe tap water for drinking and bathing. In addition to individuals, the water crisis has had a huge impact on essential community services in Jackson as well. As I mentioned, schools, hospitals, and even fire stations suffered from the lack of reliable water access, disrupting education, healthcare, and emergency services. For instance, one of the state's largest hospitals, the University of Mississippi Medical Center, saw its ability to fight fires and provide air conditioning compromised by the water crisis. Lacking access to clean and safe drinking water can wreak havoc on a city. Not only can it disincentivize others from moving to the area, but it is a driver for those who can afford to leave the city to do so. Meanwhile, those who remain have been left to bear the brunt of the crisis, spending significant amounts of money on bottled water and other temporary solutions. This financial burden may have set families back even further, making recovery even more challenging. Challenge number 3. Crime. Another key factor leading to Jackson's decline has been its significant crime problem, particularly in terms of its high homicide rate, which has ranked the highest among major cities in the United States for 2 consecutive years. In addition to issues like systemic racism and a lack of substantial water infrastructure, Jackson's crime trend has further contributed to its perception as an undesirable place to live. For instance, the surge in crime has made national headlines depicting Jackson as a city in crisis and deterring potential residents and investors. So just how bad is crime here? Well, according to city data, Jackson has had a crime rate that's higher than a whopping 98.3% of other U.S. cities. According to Neighborhood Scout, its total crime index is 4 on a scale of 1 to 100, where 100 means that the city is the safest in the U.S. and 1 the least safe. In total, Jackson's violent crime rate is 6.31 per 1,000 residents, and its property crime rate is almost 38 per 1,000 residents. Compare that to the U.S. average violent crime and property crime rates, which are 4 per 1,000 residents and 20 per 1,000 respectively, and it should be pretty clear just how big of an issue crime is here. Several factors have contributed to Jackson's high crime rates, including systemic issues like poverty and unemployment. In addition, the city's mayor has pointed out that other factors have contributed to the surge in violent crime specifically, including the inability to detain offenders due to limitations on the city's detention system, a backed-up court system, an influx of high-powered guns on the streets, and state laws that make it challenging for officers to detain suspects carrying illegal weapons. The crime wave in Jackson has had pretty significant economic consequences. For instance, the city's high crime rate has deterred businesses from wanting to operate in the city, and in recent years, many businesses have gone so far as to leave the city's downtown altogether, likely limiting economic growth and job opportunities. In addition to economic consequences, There are social and mental health consequences to Jackson being a high crime city as well. For example, one recent study that was published in Social Science and Medicine showed the association between high crime neighborhoods and poor mental health, suggesting that being exposed to crime can cause poor mental health. As you can see, the city's high crime rate not only has affected its residents' quality of life, but also has inhibited Jackson's economic growth and development. Challenge number 4. High poverty rates. As I mentioned at the start of this video, as of the latest census data, Jackson had a poverty rate of 25.9%, which is almost 14% higher than the national poverty rate. This high rate of poverty means that a significant portion of the city's population struggles to meet basic needs such as food, housing, and healthcare. In addition, the median household income in Jackson stands at $42,193, which is significantly lower than the national median and further highlights the economic challenges faced by its residents. Unfortunately, Jackson's high poverty rates aren't anything new. The city has faced high poverty consistently over the years, which has contributed significantly to its challenges and has had an unfortunate effect of holding residents back as they struggle to break the cycle of poverty and build generational wealth. For instance, the high poverty rates in Jackson have negatively impacted educational and future employment opportunities for its residents. Children born into poverty are less likely to attend school or complete their education, which in turn can affect their ability to secure well-paying jobs in the future. This potential lack of education and future employment opportunities perpetuates the cycle of poverty, making it difficult for individuals and families to break free from economic hardship and build generational wealth. Diving more into generational wealth, or the lack thereof, this is crucial in understanding the long-term effects of poverty in Jackson. Families living in poverty often have little to no assets to pass down to future generations, which means that each successive generation starts from a similar place of being economically disadvantaged. This not only limits families' financial stability and social mobility, but also contributes to its ongoing cycle of poverty within the larger community. Finally, as we saw earlier, this has also contributed to economic challenges, as those who can afford to leave Jackson often do so, further depleting the city's tax base. Now, it's probably pretty clear to you at this point that Jackson has a fairly troubled history and is in fact still struggling from many of the issues that have plagued it for decades, or even longer. Despite all of this, however, there's still a chance that Jackson has a brighter future ahead of it. As we just saw, education has been cited as one of the best ways to get out of poverty, and Mississippi is actually looking to be pretty promising in this area. For instance, while in 2013 its schools were ranked the worst in the nation, literally at number 50, today they've climbed in rankings all the way to number 35, which is a pretty major accomplishment. To make things better, this trend seems to be continuing, as between 2018 and 2021, Mississippi was ranked the second best in the nation for its educational improvements, and in Jackson specifically, one of the city's public high schools was recently ranked number 10 in the nation. What about how Oakland, California got ruined?